Like I said, we're going to enter into a long introduction in order to get to a messy life next week. And I'm going to ask you a question. Maybe most of us have even asked that. Lord, what is my calling? Lord, what is my purpose for being here? Lord, am I here to leave a mark? And when do I get to leave that mark? And what we're really asking is, Lord, what is my individual ministry, aren't we? Or maybe we're in a position of life where there's some discontentment. Maybe we think that we've wasted our life, or the current circumstances that we're in, we're not doing anything for the benefit of anyone or the world or what we think is significant and beneficial. Maybe we're tired of the grind of the 9-to-5 life and paying all bills and never getting caught up. Maybe we're at home managing a home that always gets dirty and always needs to be cleaned up, always taking a kid here and a kid over there, always breaking up another fight, breaking up another argument. We come to church and then we feel guilty because we're not doing enough here. Can't give enough in our time, can't give enough of our energy, can't give enough of our money, and we feel like we're split in 5 million different directions, and we feel like we're worthless, and we're not doing anything. And our nature craves to be significant, doesn't it? We crave to do something that's going to be important to ourselves or to others, but more importantly, to God. And so, before we get into this individual calling, Lord, what is my individual call in life? We have to ask the question, Lord, are we fulfilling the universal calling in our life? The calling that we are all asked to be participants of. And I'm just going to give you the short answer to that, and we'll have to unpack that as we go along. But the short answer is to be faithful. Be faithful. And that will take us in a lot of different directions in our life. Be faithful in positioning yourself in a growing, intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. Because Jesus says, apart from me, you can do what? Nothing. So why are we looking for significance in a specific calling if we're, first of all, not nurturing that relationship with Christ Himself? Where is Christ's joy the most? Is when we spend time with Him, knowing that this time that we spend with Him is going to equip us for everything we need to do His works. The works is a byproduct out of our relationship that we've groomed and He's groomed within us. But so many times we'll sacrifice a relationship in order to do the what? The work or the calling. Where God wants our hearts first. Then He has access to fulfill His purposes in us. We are to be faithful in our position if we are married or we have a spouse. Are you faithful in your marriage covenant? Are you faithful in being a parent to your children, raising them in the admonition of the Lord? Do you pray for them continuously? Do you model the character of Christ to them? Do you train them appropriately? Are you faithful as an employee working for somebody else? Are you an asset to that company? That you are valuable to that company that you work for? That you are trustworthy? That you are a person of integrity? That you are glowing with enthusiasm that's contagious to the rest of the workforce, and when you're not there, there's a big difference. Are you faithful in bearing the image of Jesus Christ Himself in every area of your life? And by bearing the image of Christ, I mean, do you carry the mind of Christ? Do you carry the mind of Christ in your attitude? Or is the mind a gutter and a cesspool, and we just keep on filling and feeding that? Are we bearing the image of God's holiness? Being set apart for sacred, holy purposes? Being in the world, but not of the world? Are we bearing the image of the humility of Jesus Christ? Is it always about us being first, or us having the most, or us getting this and us getting that? What is our position in prayer? Is it always asking God to give us more, 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 more? Or do we say, I'm willing to serve. I'm willing to do without. I'm willing to suffer if I'm bearing the image of Christ? Are we bearing the image of Christ in our obedience? Even when it's hard, we do the right thing because it pleases God. It obeys His laws. Or we violate the law out of our convenience, and then we apologize for it later. Do we bear the image of Christ in His love? We come in contact with many people throughout the day. Many people that have bad attitudes, many people that are unlovely, many people that are ugly in their spirit and in their interaction with you. Can you still love them as Christ loves them? Are we bearing the image of Christ? That's what it means to be faithful. So this word faith, to be filled with faith, can be simplified in a secular generic term as believing and trusting in someone or something without the guarantee of favorable results. That's the secular definition. But what's the spiritual definition? Is believing and trusting God in all things, visible and invisible. Believing and trusting God in things that are present as well as into the future. Believing and trusting God in the impossible as well as the impossible. Trusting and believing God in committing our life to be Spirit-led in a very demanding, carnal, physical realm. Faith is spiritual eyes that allow us to experience the invisible God. We've been given physical senses in order to experience the world. But God equips us with the faith eyes to be able to experience Him, though we don't see Him. There's still the evidence. Faith is finding comfort in His omnipresence, always available, always interested, always involved in our life. Do we find comfort in that? Faith is to be developed, it's to be exercised, and it's to be strengthened. But because we are imperfect, what is that faith going to look like? Imperfect. Imperfect. And so as we take these imperfections in this faith walk, we're going to maybe look silly. We may look not very pretty, maybe even messy. Think about a toddler who's just learning how to walk. What are they going to do often? Is fall down. But what do? They get right back up. And their curious minds and their curious eyes are going to take them to places where they're going to touch a lot of things and grab a lot of things and possibly break a lot of things, right? All right, but they're still loved in their imperfections, knowing that they're going to mature and they're going to grow. They're experiencing the world. Now, sometimes you like to tie their shoelaces together and lock their arms and put them in a cage. But what are you doing? You're robbing them of the experience of growing and maturing. Well, God doesn't do that in our faith walk. He allows us to experience the fullness of life with all its prickly events and activities, and He's with us every step of the way, knowing that that's going to build the faith in us to be faithful in all things, trusting Him in all those things. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit by turning to Hebrews chapter 12. But just before I get to Hebrews chapter 12, just a couple of verses before that in chapter 11. You all know chapter 11, we call it the Hall of Faith, right? Jewish people that were positioned in activities in their life where God prevailed to do some incredible work. And verse 39 says that these were all commended for their faith. And the listing that comes prior to that. These were all commended or honored or memorialized for their faith. Yet none of them received what had been promised. The promise was what? The Messiah, the Savior, who would deliver them from their sins or pay the penalty of their sins. They died not receiving that at that particular point. But faith took them where? To the finish line. To their death, believing. Now verse 40. God has planned something better for us, those are the Jews, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. Now, can any of us be perfect? And can any of us have perfect faith? But when we enter by faith in a relationship with Jesus Christ, what is He doing? We have entered into His perfection. for Him to do His rock-tumbling work to shape us and to mold us into the image of Jesus Christ. He's developing character, developing our attitudes, shaping us in His image. So we are striving and growing into that perfection. Now in chapter 12, verse 1, he says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses," and that would be all the characters of that hall of faith, "let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance," or some of you versions say endurance, "the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before Him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So consider Him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart." In other words, fall into despair and hopelessness. This was written for our encouragement. This was written for our inspiration, not for our perfection. Only one is perfect. Now this great cloud of witnesses, the Old Testament saints. And now we have a little illustration or a visualization of cheerleaders cheering us along this race. Their witness is an example. It's something that we can look towards them. And they're all different. If we go through all these characters of chapter 11, they're all different. Different times, different workings, different characters, different personalities, all shapes and sizes. They're all different. We're told in this verse to throw off everything that hinders us. We all come to this faith arena with a lot of baggage, don't we? We have some sinfulness. We have some worries. We have lifestyle choices that may not have been the best. We have a certain level of worldliness. We have sinfulness. We bring a lot of junk to the table that we carry with us. And what does this verse say we're to do with it? Release it. Why? Because it entangles us in this race of faith. This race is an enduring race. It's not a sprint. And so you have to take this one step at a time, one moment at a time, one day at a time. We are to run it with endurance. We push forward, getting closer and closer and closer to the goal. When we fall down, we do what? We get back up. When we cramp, when we limp, when we wheeze, we still take another step forward until we get where? To the finish line. I want to give you an illustration. I want you to imagine that I've given everybody a form to fill out because I am entering you into a road race that's going to take place a month from now. And it's going to be a 20-mile road race. And you can't pull yourself out of the race. I'm sorry. It's mandatory. You got to do it. And so you give me all the vital statistics and all the stuff, information I want, and you bring it back to me. Now, some of you will take that serious. Some of you could care less about it, but you're all going to have to show up for this race. Now, those who take it serious, what are they going to do? They're going to prepare. They're going to train. They're going to squeeze in time between work and home and all kinds of things to start running. Start building up your lungs, start building up your legs, start building up your endurance to prepare yourself for this race. Others are going to be lax. I don't need to take this serious. I can just walk or I can limp or I'll just get through it somehow. So it comes to race day. And there's a table set up for the registration. You come and you just enter your name to that table. And you look around and you see a lot of different people. Some that are young, some that are old. Some that are large, some that are not so large. You're going to have women, you're going to have men, you're going to have children, you're going to have elderly. You're going to have some that have one leg, some that are in wheelchairs, some that are in walkers. You're going to have all types coming to this race. And they're all going to come with some backpacks because, well, you don't know what the conditions are going to be for that day. So you may need to bring 3 or 4 shoes, and the girls might have to bring 10 or 20 shoes, depending on the weather and the terrain that they're going to have to run in. You're going to have to bring another change of clothes for after the race. Or you just realize that the temperature is different, you're going to have to change. You're going to bring your water, your energy drinks, your energy bars. You're going to bring all the stuff you need in that backpack. And then the announcer announces, and he calls you all. You're all called universally to that starting point and that starting line. And as you line up there, what are you going to do with those backpacks? What's that? You better get rid of them. Why? Because they're going to hold you back. They're going to take you back. You should be prepared. You should be equipped with everything you need at this particular time to go through that race and to finish that race strong. So you got to release it. Well, in this race, there's a lot of obstacles. You're going to be going through various landscapes, various elevations. Sometimes you're going to be going up. Sometimes you're going to be going down. You turn right in this corner, you're going to end up in a forest. You're going to have to be dodging trees and rocks. You go around this corner over here, it's going to be wide open terrain in the blistering sunshine. And around this corner over here, there's going to be all kinds of puddles that you're going to either have to run through, jump through, go around. But there's going to be a lot there that you're not going to have the expectation of knowing what's ahead. But you've got to run that race. And as you're running this race, you realize your body's responding to this race of endurance. Your legs are starting to get tired and weak and weary. You're developing cramps in your side. Your lungs are burning. And your body's telling your mind to do what? Quit. Stop. I've had enough. But your mind keeps on telling your body, no, we can go, we can go, we can go. It's just going to be around the next corner or over the next hill. It's going to be there. But as you keep on going, you realize that there's not an end to this in sight. And so now your mind is getting to the point where it doesn't want to move on as well. Losing heart, losing motivation. And so what has to kick in at this time? What's that? Okay, adrenaline, something deep down in your spirit or something that's going to motivate you to get beyond what you can't see. And so you've been told on that sheet of paper that I gave you, some of you read it, some of you didn't read it, but there's a glorious prize waiting for all those who finish that race. I can't even put a price tag on that amount. But you didn't read that because that was in small print, or you thought it was in small print. You just put it off to the side and collected dust. But that's the motivating force to get you to the other side. And so as you come to this finish line, you're pressing on, you've fallen down a couple times, you've gotten beaten up by the branches, and maybe you're bleeding a little bit. But along the course, you see others that have been placed along there for your encouragement. You have family members cheering you on, believing in you. You have those who have run the race before, and they know that you can get through. And they're giving you instructions as far as how to get through. Maybe there's some there that are just curious to find out how you're going to run this race. Is he going to quit? Or is he going to try to finish this race strong? Is he going to look silly while he's doing this? Or is he going to look like a real runner? And then you get to the point where you have to fix your eyes on something ahead. You cannot look down. This one step is just not enough. You have to look ahead and know that you're making ground. So you press on. I was on track for a little bit, and my coach always told us as runners, he said, when you come to the finish line, I don't want you to get to the finish line. I want you to run through the finish line. I want you to imagine this is a wall, a brick wall that you have to get through. Not get to, but get through. And so as you're approaching this line, you're pulling everything out of your reserve tank, and you're pulling it up as much as you possibly can to build up enough momentum to be able to go burst through that wall and onto the victor's stand to finish that race. Because what good does it do to get to the finish line short of it and just stop? It doesn't do any good. And you may be so weak to the point where you're just walking to crawl. And that little tape line, very fine line that determines you're in the race and you've completed the race. But you've got to burst through that line, and it takes momentum to burst through that. Our verse here says to fix our eyes on Jesus. Why? It says He's the author and the perfecter of our faith race. He created Faith Arena. It's His platform in which He chooses to operate and to reveal Himself to us, to manifest His character and His essence by including us in these workings. And so He's created this work. Do you think He knows the obstacles in this course? Do you think He knows it's going to be difficult? Okay? So he knows all these things. And so, because he has created this, it says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Now we have someone else running the race. God created this faith race. And then in order for us to fix our eyes in something that's a higher standard than ourselves, we need a perfect standard. So who did he enter into this race? Jesus, his son. So Jesus runs the same race that you and I are called into. To live in this world and to be faithful in the circumstances that we've been given, including the pains and the sufferings. We're called to be faithful in every circumstance and to run through that finish line with gusto and strength. When we fall, we get back up. Jesus Christ did something different when he came to the starting line, though. He saw all those backpacks that you guys left there. What did he do? He took them all. He took all your personal backpack, my backpack, and he placed them on himself. And then along this race, as he's going and he's carrying the burden of our backpack and our sinfulness, along that way, it wasn't enough. He had to pick up something else along the way. What was that? The cross. And he had to be fastened to that cross and to run that race. And he didn't have the spectators on the side cheering him on. What did he have on the side? He had unbelievers. He had jeerers. He had mockers. He had those who were spitting on him. Those who were making fun of him. Those who were throwing things at him. Those who were punching him. Those who were trying to trip him up every step of the way. Those who were laughing at his blood. Those who could not even recognize his face any longer. Trying to get him to quit. Trying to get him to give up. But every time he fell, what did he do? He got back up. And then he saw the finish line. He saw ahead. He didn't just see the finish line, but instead he built up his greatest power. He built up the greatest reserve tank that he could have. And what did he do? He burst through that finish line. Death. And he defeated that death, and he entered into what? Victory. Into glory. And now he sits in the champion's seat next to God the Father on the right hand. And so he burst through it. So there's our model. There's our perfect standard. There's what we fix our eyes on. Now, we got to go back to chapter 11. These are people like you and I. People have to live this life out, and we have to live it differently because we have not equipped the same way as God is equipped in his deity, are we? But he does understand our humanness because he was also man. Let's take a look at Hebrews 11. And you're going to see here a two-word phrase that's going to be repeated over and over and over and over and over again, depending on the translation or version you use. It may be 16 times up to 22 times. What are the two words that you see over and over again? By faith, or some of you say through faith. Right? Now, linked to this by faith is also going to be a person or persons, right? And then linked to that is also going to be an event or an activity or some accomplishment. Let's take a look at some of them. We don't have time to look at all of them, but we have Mr. Abel. By faith, Abel, and what did he exemplify his faith for? Was he made a better what? Sacrifice. That's what he's being commended for. He was commended for being a righteous man. Verse 5, we have Enoch. By faith, what did he do? He walked with God. Verse 7, we have Mr. Noah. It said by faith, what did he do? He condemned the world and he built an ark. We have Mr. Abraham. He obeyed God. He left everything. That wasn't enough. The one promise that he received through his son, sacrifice him, and he was willing to do that. We have Isaac. He passed blessings to his sons. Jacob passed blessings to his sons. And we go on and on and on. And we have Joseph on verse 22. He gave instructions to take his bones to Israel. Why? Because God was going to work out his plan in that land. By faith, Moses' parents, what did they do? They hid Moses by faith. They weren't afraid of what the king's edict was. And then when Moses grew up, by faith, what did he do? He renounced the things of Egypt and instead lived as a Hebrew of the promised children. He was raised up to be a leader. By faith, on verse 29, it's not a specific person, but what is it? It's the people, or the Hebrew people that were released from Egypt. By faith, they had to kick in faith and pass through the Red Sea. By faith, here's an event, not a person, but by faith, what fell? The walls of Jericho. And you know the story of how many times they had to march around that. By faith, in 31, we have a prostitute hiding spies. Now, these don't sound necessarily like pretty faith experiences, and we can go on and on and on. And then we come to verse 32. And what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell. So in other words, there's an incomplete list. And he's going to just quickly highlight a few of these guys here. Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah. And I have parentheses around there, because these are very unusual characters that God has included in the inspired word in the hall of faith. Now, something that these men have in common is what? Anybody know? Well, they have faith, yes. They're all in there by their faith, but they came from one book. Remember what book? Judges. Very good. All right, and we know the Judges was that cyclic time during Israel when they were blessed by God, and then they fell into a state of apathy. They forgot about God, and then they were entertaining themselves with idols and worldliness, disobeyed God, rebelled against God, and then God had to spank them. And he sent oppressors in their life, and they get to the point where they're crying out to God. God was faithful. He heard their cries. He delivered them. He restored them, raised up a judge to help lead them to that point of blessing again. And that cycle went on and on and on and on again. And so we have these unusual characters here that we're going to talk about a little bit more. And then one in particular, because there's one that confounds me. It's Samson. How did he get his name in here? It is a mess. So if you want to read ahead, that's what we're going to talk about next week, is Samson 13, 14, 15, and 16. We're going to take a look at him a little bit more in depth. All right, so this hall of faith, or hall of fame and faith, is a list of people that were commended for their faith, and I've put them in sort of like categories. We have the household names. Those are that are characterized by a consistent life of faith. We have David. We have Abraham, Moses, Isaac, Noah. They were what we consider long faith livers, all right? Or they were faithful in their living. And then we have the event categories, or the one-time hero moment stories. And that would be the ones that we're not as familiar with, but there was a specific, significant event in their life where they were at the right place, the right time, doing the right things, and something happened, something that was glorious. And then we have this category called the unsung, or the unnamed heroes. And if you look at verse 33, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured, refused to be released, so that they may gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were persecuted, mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. And they wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. But, in verse 39, they're all commended for their faith. So we have the big players. We have the historic event players. And then we have the unnamed, the unsung heroes of faith as well. These can be separated as people who served in some capacity of faith, or they suffered in some capacity to faith. But we don't have their names. And I think there's reason for that. But in this hall of faith, who is the real hero in it? Jesus, God. Remember, He designed the faith experience or the faith walk or the arena of faith. This is the platform that He gave. He invited man to participate in this faith arena. He set the stage for them to be put in a position to exercise their faith in order for God to do what? To be glorified and honored. And so man enters into this subtle partnership with God. But God is the hero here. God was faithful every step of the way. Man had to believe. And there was varying degrees of belief and faith in their life. But God always came out what? Victorious. And God was always faithful. Now, apart from faith, these people are insignificant. If we don't have the faith race and these people that enter this faith, what are they? They're insignificant people. Apart from faith, these people do not experience God's power, God's might, God's faithfulness. And apart from these so-called heroes of faith, we also lack the evidence of God's involvement and God's equipping and God's partnership in these individuals and in these groups. And that gives us great encouragement and gives us great inspiration of God's work in man. I'm going to use another long illustration. I love baseball. Anybody here been to Cooperstown, the Hall of Fame for baseball? Bob's the only one that's been here? Okay. Dor, you been there? All right. Some back there. Good. Someday I'll get there. But my idea of baseball has changed. I love baseball, and I'm a baseball fanatic. But my idea of baseball has changed over the years. I go to the Rays games, and there's a Ted Williams Hall of Fame there. And it's just a collection of memorabilia and historic moments and people that we consider heroes of that game. Well, baseball was created as a game for leisure activity and entertainment. And I emphasize game. Unfortunately, that game or that entertainment has become bigger than what? Than life. Bigger than it's supposed to be. Now, unfortunately, faith, which was created for life, has become a form of entertainment or just a leisure time activity for some of us and for some people. And so we just need to set some perspective with this game. People or men who hit an object with a wooden stick. They launch this object with a high amount of velocity, maybe 90 miles an hour. They put on a chunk of leather in their hand to catch this object, and then we pay them a lot of money, and we esteem them, and they're very popular and they're famous. Now, take these same men, put them in Siberia, put them in the Amazon jungle, put them in a desert, put them in the jungles of New Guinea. How significant are those skills and those people going to be in those areas? They wouldn't survive. A platform has been established. They've entered into that platform. They've developed skills and abilities within that platform, and then they've been elevated to hero status, almost as gods. Baseball has become an obsession. I'm going to divide into categories. There are the individual players, those who've been characterized by a long, productive career, the best of the best of the best. They put up high numbers. Name some big number baseball players. Derek Jeter. Roy Halladay. I'm not sure if he's in the Hall of Fame yet, but possibly. Who else is in big time players in the Hall of Fame? Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle. Come on, name some Red Sox guys. Ted Williams, all right, Carl Yastrzemski. All right, everybody wants to name the Yankees. It's not the Hall of Yankees, it's the Hall of Baseball. All right. So, now think of the best of the best. The highest average over a long career is in the 360s. That means they've got up 10 times. They've failed how many times? At least 6, almost 7 times a game they've failed. Is there any perfection in these baseball players? Every single one of these baseball players has struck out. Every single one of these baseball players was put in a moment where they could be a hero, but ended up a goat. Every single one of these players has had that object come at them, and they've had that big chunk of leather, and they've dropped the ball in an important time. And they've made a lot of errors. But they're being highlighted and they're being exalted because of the times that they didn't make any errors, or they're consistently higher than their peers. And so we've elevated them, and we've inducted them and honored them. Now there is the category of the historic moments, people that were in the right place, the right time, and doing the right thing. Back in 1960, Pittsburgh Pirates playing the Yankees, 7-game World Series, bottom of the ninth, it's tied. One player gets up, pitch comes in, and what does he do? He hits a home run and wins the game, the only game where the World Series was won in a walk-off home run. Name that player, Rob. All right, he was just dying to get that out there. I know. All right. He was not inducted in the Hall of Fame. He didn't put up the statistics over a long period of time. But in that particular moment, he was the hero. Everybody heard about what he had done. And then we have the unsung heroes of the nameless players, and those are pictured on the championship team photo. You have your Babe Ruths and your Lou Gehrig's and DiMaggio's, but you had a whole bunch of other players. And you may not recognize their names. And then you have the bat boys, and you have the managers, and you have other coaches, and you have other people that are not as significant, but just as important to the success of that team as the big stars. Everybody had a place in that team in order for that championship to occur. Without some of those key players that are unnamed, you don't win the championship. All imperfect. All had a high failure rate. Now, have a little fun with this one. Jesus Christ, if he were to play baseball. All right, he gets up to bat. What does he do every time he gets a bat? He hits a home run, hits it out of the ballpark. All right, every time he pitches the ball, what does he do with the batter? Strikes him out. Every time that ball is launched on the field, who catches it? Jesus Christ. So, is it going to be any fun for any of us to play that game? We know we're not going to win. We know we can't hit that perfect standard, so we don't even try. Some of us take that same mindset of faith. Jesus is the perfect standard. He's the author and the perfecter of our faith. But he invites us to participate in this game or this arena of faith, knowing that we are not going to be perfect. But he invites us to get to that point where we can hone in the skills and the abilities and the assets that he's given to us so that we're all part of his team. We're going to go back to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. Mr. Gideon, Mr. Barak, Mr. Samson, and Mr. Jephthah. This is a time in Judges where everybody did what was right in his own eyes. Not like our culture today, right? We all walk the line of holiness. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. We have Mr. Gideon. He was called for a specific purpose, for a specific assignment to deal with the Midianites and the Amalekites, the enemies that had risen up against Israel. But he badgered God for a sign. He was not willing to enter into that calling unless a sign came with it. And he came out victorious. God was faithful in that victory. Now, Gideon is not what we would call a faithful man, because later in his life, he had dealt ruthlessly with the residents of 2 towns that did not come to his aid when he requested. Some of the leaders in Israel wanted to elevate him to a higher status. And he said, no, that's God's job. But what I will do is that you all take some of your plunder, like those gold earrings you're wearing, and just lay them before me. And he gathered all those gold earrings, and he fashioned in what they call an ephod, a golden ephod that he wore. And they started to idolize this ephod. And then they took their eyes off of God. And it said it led Gideon astray, led his family astray, and eventually led all of Israel astray. He led them into idolatry, which led them further away from God. Then we have Mr. Barak, powerful military leader, called to deal with the Canaanite general Sisera, who was a threat to Israel. But Barak refused to go into battle unless Deborah, who was a prophetess at that time, would accompany him. She had been given revelation from God to give to Barak to enter into this battle. And said, can't do it unless you come with me. Showing that he lacked the faith to trust God in this, and he needed Deborah to come along with him. So if he was going to lose this battle, it was only who was going to get the credit? Deborah. She was going to take the loss in this. And so she did accompany him into battle. And we know the story is that they were victorious. But Barak did not receive the honor. Instead, it was a servant woman who killed General Sisera, and she received the honor. Not Barak, because he didn't trust God in his assignment. And then we have Mr. Jephthah. He's a fun one. He was a social outcast. He was the son of a prostitute. But he was a mighty warrior. Mighty warrior. And the Ammonite enemies had risen up to become a great nuisance against Israel. And they came to him and they called him to lead their army against them. And Jephthah did everything right. Everything right in this battle. And he came back victorious. But before he went into battle, he made a vow before the Lord. And he said, Lord, if I am to return home victorious, the first thing that greets me at my home, I will sacrifice to you. Now, the way the homes are designed at that particular time is that the animal pens were on the outside of the home. And so he's envisioning coming back home from that victory, and who's going to greet him? An animal, a little lamb or a goat, and then he would make sacrifice of that. But instead, who showed up? His daughter, his only child, his only daughter. And he had to fulfill his vow, which is also a violation of God's command. But he fulfilled it, and we don't know exactly how he fulfilled it. There's speculation that he did offer her as a blood sacrifice. Some say that he banished her, where she was never able to have children, and to carry his line to the next generation. Well, Samson doesn't look so bad now afterwards. and we're going to get to him next week. But even all the other players of this hall of faith that we have, these are people that God had chosen to enter into his arena of faith. We have Noah. One day he was drunk and he left himself exposed. We call that Natick, or naked, right? We have Abraham. He lied. He deceived 2 kings on 2 occasions in regards to his relationship with his wife Sarah. He didn't wait on God for the promised child. Instead, he took on a handmaiden, Hagar. Jacob, model citizen in the art of deception. He tricked his brother of his inheritance, tricked his dad of the blessing to be received. He had 12 boys, but they came from 2 wives and 2 servant women. Joseph, that's that cocky teenager who irritated the snot out of his brothers. We have Judah. He impregnated his daughter-in-law thinking that she was only a prostitute. Moses, murder, anger. David, adulterer, murderer, polygamist, dysfunctional dad. Even on his deathbed, he handed Solomon a hit list. Take these guys out. I may not be around to do this, so here, I'm going to pass this hit list off to you to take these guys out. Samuel, he allowed his sons to defile the priesthood, the sacrifices and offerings to be presented before the Lord. Elijah, he got fed up. He gave up. And he even asked God to kill him, to take him out. Jeremiah, he also wanted to quit. And so we don't have perfect people trying to live out a faith life. But these people here for our what? Encouragement and our for inspiration. They're still part of the team. And things still, God is not intimidated by our messes. God's not intimidated by our failures. He wants us to live out this faith walk with endurance. We get down or we fall down, we're going to get back up again. We may need some help. But God will prevail. God's will prevail regardless. And we're going to see this in Samson's life. God had a specific will for Israel. He entered Samson into this. He provided him with everything he needed to protect God's will. But Samson chose to use the world as a playground rather than his mission field. And some of us will do the same thing. rather than see the world that He's given us, this time and space, as a mission field to be occupied in developing a relationship with Him and then allowing that to be a byproduct, to be a workings outside, we play with the world and we play with the things of the world and we end up getting scorched and we never amount to the full potential that we could have had. And that's what we'll see in Samson's life. So come back next week and we'll take a look at him. Father God, we thank you, Lord, for your love for us and that you created this thing called faith and that we have been entered into based on our belief in Jesus Christ. And Father, it can be very tricky, it can be very messy, it can be very, very complicated at times, but you only ask us to be faithful, to take steps forward in our faith, to lean in on you, to trust you in those things that we are fearful of, things that we have made mistakes, and just trust you that you'll bring some semblance of goodness out of them. Father, we want to be able to be used by you for those specific callings, but we have to learn to be faithful in the things that we have each and every day. Whether we're married, whether we're parents, whether we're workers, wherever we're at, Lord, we are required to be faithful. And so we want to honor in you in those things, and so that you would continue to fill our heart, to fill our mind with that strength, spiritual strength that we need to finish the course that you've set for us as individuals that will dovetail into your perfect will to advance your message onto this dying world. And we lift it up to you in Jesus' name because you are faithful.